In Mark chapter 12, Jesus spends almost the entire chapter talking to the Pharisees and the Sadducees, his religious enemies, about all the things that they do wrong, what they have wrong about the nature of God and about the law. And he puts all of their problems on display for all of the people to expose them as frauds. But then towards the end of the chapter, Jesus goes to the temple and he sits across from the collection area where the temple taxes were gathered. And he observes two types of people coming there and giving offerings. The first is a group of rich people. They have tons of money. They're throwing big bags of money into the collection area. And then he sees one poor widow who has nothing. She has 2 mites, which is like 2 pennies, basically insignificant. And she throws those 2 mites into the collection area. And Jesus tells his apostles that that woman has given more than all of the rich people because she gave everything that she had. What I find interesting here is Jesus' focus. If he had wanted to, he could have continued to expose the errors of the Jewish nation. He could have talked about how in Deuteronomy 24 and 26, God had commanded that when the tithes were gathered, when they had gathered for feasts, they were supposed to care for widows and orphans and sojourners. Here, they were gathering for the Passover, gathering tithes, and yet they seem to have no regard for the widow who's walking amongst them. He could have talked about how apparently nobody had listened to his teaching, that God would rather have mercy than sacrifice, because otherwise some of these rich men would have taken some of the money out of the bag they were giving to the temple and helped this woman out. But Jesus doesn't focus on those things. Instead, in this scene of darkness and neglect for what God cared about, he finds a good example and he pulls out just one tiny light that many people would probably think is insignificant. And he holds it up to his apostles and he tells them and teaches them about what kind of faith they ought to have. Jesus shifts the perspective from the negative to the positive. I think there's a lesson there for us. It's so easy to get caught up on all the things that are wrong. Maybe it's within a church. Maybe you're not a member of the church and you look in and you're like, man, those people have problems. Or maybe you are a member of the church and you think, well, there's all these people here that aren't doing their job and that's what I'm going to put my focus on, and I'm going to be negative Nancy all the time because there are problems here. But Jesus shows us that yes, there may be problems, and while there's a time to recognize those, there needs to be a shift as well, so that we recognize the positive things, the people whose faith is something to be learned from. And here, this woman probably had no idea, never did, that Jesus had pointed her out and her name was going to go down in the Bible forever and ever, and it's an example of faith. Yet Jesus looks into this dark scene, he sees the light, and that's what he pulls out to put on display to the people that he's teaching. And so what should we take away from this text? I think the easiest lesson to learn is that even in the darkness, there's always light, and we need to learn to look for that light and to show it to other people as an example so that they can learn from it as well.